Hello, everyone. This is George DeSantis with the Look at the Market for the week ending May 27th, 2016. As we usually do, I'd like to begin to review the charts by looking at the monthly chart of the S&P that we typically look at. So let's begin there. So this is the monthly chart of the S&P 500. For those of you who are new, and there are a few new people to the look of the market. Each bar here represents 1 month's data, the high, the low, the open, the close. What we find here is that the market for this month is closed at its high so far for the month, which is very bullish. The other thing is that the parabolic, this yellow dot, switched from above the price bars, got hit here, and switched to below the recent bar. That signals a reversal in this downtrend to an uptrend. So we are now looking at an indicator that's signaling that the market has now switched on the monthly chart, the longer term time frame, to an uptrend. At the middle of the chart here, we have MACD histogram, and that's continuing to trend up. And those of you familiar with Alex Elder's books, know that Alex points out that one of the best times to be buying the market or the stock is when MACD is beginning to trend up from below the zero line. That's again pretty bullish, right? Elder Force index it's crossed above the zero line and is continuing to trend up, and in fact it broke this trend line here that was signaling this downtrend in Elder Force. That's also signaling a bullish signal. So let's take a look at the weekly chart. And here's the weekly chart of the S&P 500. For some time now, I've been talking about, and others, of course, if you watch the gurus on TV, talking about being in a trading range, this range here, between this high and these lows. And sure enough, we just broke above this level here. We didn't quite break above this high. That was 2111. The high on this bar would be 2111, yes. We haven't got there yet. We closed just at 2100. I think the close was 2099.06. You can't get any closer than that. So, and also it's interesting to note that we closed above this trend line, which connects this high with this high, and we extended it out here, and we closed above this trend line. So that's pretty bullish. Notice we hit that 2046 support level. We had a doji week before, and now we have a nice bullish candlestick here because we had a over 2% move on the S&P this past week. And that's pretty bullish. Parabolic is now below the most recent bar. That's last week's bar. So there's no indication to switch this to a downtrend at all, reversal to a downtrend. We are in an uptrend on the weekly chart. We've been that way since the Kalman filter crossed above the instantaneous trend line in blue, Kalman filter in yellow. That signaled this beginning of this uptrend here, although we can see that there was a move before that. However, if we look at RSI 12 remained above the 50% line, and since it crossed above the 40% line here, we had that nice move back. This was back in February 11th, I think it was. So this indicator, RSI 12, is, especially on the weekly chart, is signaling an uptrend. MACD, the lines are still above, the shorter trend line is still above the longer term trend line, and so we still have an uptrend. Never mind, there was a bit of a pullback here on the histogram, That happens quite often in an uptrend. I mentioned that the last time, 2 weeks ago. Percent R reversed and is now back above the 80% line. So the momentum is very strong. Momentum for this uptrend is very strong. Notice that it crossed above 20 here, continued above 50 here, and we were off to the races. Of course, the big question is, do we break above that 2100, 2111 high, and how far do we go from here? Anyone's guess. But right now, you don't want to short this market, of course. You don't want to bet against the bulls here at all. The bulls are in charge right now. Let's take a look at the daily chart. So here's one of the daily charts we look at. And you remember 2 weeks ago, I talked about this possible head and shoulder pattern. Head here, shoulder here, shoulder here. The neckline being at 2046. Well, we didn't break below the neckline much at all. We just had this one day here that we were below it. But the target that I calculated from this head and shoulder pattern, if we in fact this head and shoulder pattern held up, was 1981, and we didn't get there. Instead, we found support at the 2046 level, and we are now crossing above the 90 WMA. This is the 930 chart, the 9 exponential moving average in yellow and the 30 weighted moving average in blue. In addition to this, we can note that this candle here is a bullish engulfing candle. It totally engulfs the body of this doji here. That's bullish. We have parabolic below the most recent bar on the bullish chart, on the daily chart, I'm sorry. And so everything is pointing in the direction of an uptrend continuing here. RSI 12 crossed above the 60% line on the daily chart, and that's pretty bullish. Notice that when it's above the 60% line, we're having a nice uptrend. Now, Larry Williams' pro-buying indicator came down to the 0% line, and now is back way above it. Also for the percent R, remember 2 weeks ago I mentioned that percent R was at the oversold level, and that previous oversold levels led to an uptrend. Well, we did get that uptrend last week, of course. Well, at least in the last 2 weeks. So on the daily chart, there's nothing but bullish indications here either. Let's take a look at some other charts. There may be there's another daily chart we want to look at. Here's that other daily chart of the S&P that we usually look at. In this case, we have the instantaneous trend line in blue, Kalman filter in yellow. And what we first note is that even though, well, for the past couple of weeks at least, we've had the Kalman filter situated below the instantaneous trend line, and now it's made a nice move above the instantaneous trend line, and the crossing of these two lines is a bullish indication. When the Kalman filter crosses above it, trend is up. I'd like to mention again this bullish engulfing candlestick. The other thing to note here is that Jerry Appel's sum of the rate of change indicator is now slightly above the 4% line. So that's another bullish indication. We did have the bullish divergence of MACD some time ago. We pointed that out because as the market made a low here and an even lower low here, MACD made a low but a higher low here. So that was a divergence, which is a bullish divergence of MACD. And of course, that materialized in an uptrend from this point on. So we were in that uptrend that we saw before. Let's take a look at another chart. Here's the weekly chart of the NASDAQ composite. We see here that the Kalman filter crossed above the instantaneous trend line here. It moved up slightly, retraced back to the instantaneous trend line, and of course last week it bumped up. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out here is that we had this bullish flag. You see, this is your flag, the upper line of the flag, the lower line here. This is your flagpole, right? That's a bullish price pattern when you have an uptrend like here. So that's a bullish pattern, and of course we broke out with this nice trend last week, nice bullish candlestick last week. RSI on the RSI 12 on the weekly chart of the Nasdaq Composite, it crossed above the 50% line again, and again that's all bullish. MACD trended down a bit, but now it's trending up again as of last week. So the Nasdaq is following suit. Just as we saw with the S&P, the Nasdaq is in a nice uptrend again, it seems. Let's take a look at another chart. Here's a daily chart of the Nasdaq. We can see this one has the instantaneous trend line and the instantaneous trend line in blue, Kalman filter in yellow. It's also trending up, of course. We had a squeeze here. The Bollinger Bands became very narrow, and now we have this up move. If we look at the expert indicator is telling us this market is currently in an uptrend mode. Best strategy is to establish a long position and hold until the end of the uptrend. So you got it right there from the expert indicator. Let's take a look at something. Here's the S&P with the regression channel. We hit the lower level, is the 10% line. We went below it, and now we're back up to 60%. But we still have room to get to the 90% line. You can notice when it gets to 90, it tends to pull back. When it gets to 10% or lower, it tends to rally. And that's where we are now. Let's take a look at something else. Here's a stockcharts.com chart with the impulse indicator, the red, blue, and green lines, bars. We can see here on the daily chart that we have green bars now. When we look at the bottom of the chart, remember 2 weeks ago I mentioned that when percent R, Williams percent R gets to this oversold level, as it did here, we tend to get a bounce, and when we get to oversold levels here, we got another bounce. Okay, we got another bounce. So now we seem to be in that same situation. We have green bars on the S&P. Let's take a look at another one. If we could switch to the weekly chart and update it, and we'll see whether that is also green. Now, we saw a couple of weeks ago that we were getting all these blue bars, but now we're on a green bar, which is bullish, of course, and it allows us to buy the market. Now we can take a look at some other things. Let's close this off. And here's a chart we looked at before. It's the percent of stocks of the S&P 100 above the 200-day moving average. Notice that when it was above the 200-day moving average here in red, that the market was really in an uptrend. We came back down here, but now we are at 79%. So this is pretty bullish too. RSI is not overbought. RSI is at 59%. So this is pretty bullish. The market really looking very strong here. In summary, everything seems on go. We need to break through the 2100, 2111, which is the recent high. And if we do, then this market has more room to run. So I'm in stocks. I haven't sold anything except CVS. I had to get out of CVS. It was in a downtrend. I wish I had gotten out sooner. Anyway, have a nice weekend. Those of you who served, God bless you and thank you for your service. Let's celebrate Memorial Day and keep in mind all those people who gave their lives for us and their bodies and lives. Have a nice weekend.